If you've been following Edgar Cayce narratives, welcome back. And if this is your first time here, I'm really glad you found this video because today we're going to look at a pattern that is easy to overlook, but once you notice it, it becomes very hard to ignore in your own life. There are moments when an opportunity appears right in front of you, and you clearly understand what needs to be done. You know what to say, and you can feel that you are capable of stepping into that moment without any real problem. But instead of moving forward, you hesitate, you pause, and then you step back. You let someone else take the lead, or you stay silent even though you had something valuable to contribute. From the outside, it might look like uncertainty or lack of confidence. But that explanation doesn't fully match what is happening inside you. Because the strange part is that you are not actually afraid of doing the thing itself. What you feel is something more specific and harder to explain, because the discomfort appears at the exact moment when attention might turn toward you, when people might notice you, when your presence becomes visible. And in that moment, something in you pulls back, not because you have to, but because it feels safer to stay unseen. So the real question is not why you hold back, but why being seen feels like something you should avoid. Before going further, we need to make one thing clear, because this pattern is often misunderstood in a very simple way that does not match the actual experience of the person going through it. When people see someone step back from attention, avoid recognition, or stay quiet in situations where they could clearly stand out, the immediate assumption is usually a lack of skill, lack of preparation, or general insecurity. But in this case, that explanation does not hold up under closer observation. The person we are talking about here is not incapable, and they are not unprepared, because in many situations they already know what they are doing. They have proven ability, and they often perform well when they are not the center of attention. What makes this pattern different is that the discomfort does not come from the action itself, but from the visibility attached to it. Meaning the same task can feel completely manageable in private but suddenly feel uncomfortable when it brings attention or recognition. This is why the usual advice about confidence or practice often does not solve the issue, because the problem is not about getting better at the task. It is about how the person reacts to being seen while doing it. So instead of asking, "Why can't I do this?" the more accurate question becomes, "Why does being visible while doing this feel uncomfortable or unsafe?" That shift in the question is important, because it changes the entire direction of how we understand this pattern and what might be behind it. Let's make this more concrete by looking at a familiar type of situation, because this pattern becomes easier to understand when you see how it plays out in real life, rather than just thinking about it in abstract terms. Imagine someone who is clearly capable in what they do, whether it's at work, in school, or in a creative field, and the people around them can see it without much effort, because their ideas are clear, their work is solid, and when they choose to speak, others tend to listen. In smaller settings or private situations, they perform without much hesitation. They contribute ideas, they solve problems, and they move through tasks with a level of ease that shows they are not lacking ability or understanding. But something changes when the situation shifts toward visibility, such as a chance to present in front of others, take on a leadership role, or receive recognition for what they have done. Because this is where the pattern begins to show itself more clearly. When that moment comes, they often find a way to step back. They might say they are not ready, or suggest that someone else would be better suited, or they minimize what they have done so it does not draw too much attention. If someone points out their strengths or gives them credit, they tend to downplay it quickly, they redirect the focus, or they make it seem smaller than it actually is, not in a dramatic way, but in a consistent and quiet way that keeps attention away from them. Over time, this creates a strange contrast, because the people around them begin to notice that there is a gap between what this person is capable of and how visible they allow themselves to be. And it becomes clear that the limitation is not skill, but something else. From the outside, it can look confusing, because others might think this person is holding themselves back for no clear reason, especially when opportunities keep appearing, and they keep choosing not to fully step into them. But inside, the experience feels different, because the thought process is not "I can't do this," but something closer to "I could do this, but I don't want the attention that comes with it," even if that thought is not always fully conscious or clearly expressed. There is often a quiet negotiation happening in the background of their mind, where part of them recognizes the opportunity and even wants to take it, while another part of them pulls away the moment it becomes visible to others. This can show up in small decisions as well, like choosing not to share an idea in a meeting, not posting their work publicly, or avoiding situations where their presence would stand out more than usual, even when there is no real risk involved. Over time, this pattern becomes consistent enough that it starts to shape how they move through different areas of life, because they begin to position themselves in ways that keep them capable, but not fully seen, involved, but not fully exposed. And if you look closely, the common thread in all of these situations is not failure, and it is not lack of opportunity, but a repeated decision to stay just outside of visibility, even when stepping forward would make sense. When you step back and look at this behavior over time, what stands out is not a single decision, but a pattern that repeats across different situations, environments, and stages of life, often without the person fully realizing how consistent it has become. This is not something that happens once in a while, because the same response shows up again and again at key moments, especially when there is a chance to become more visible, more recognized, or more clearly identified for what they can do. You start to see it in professional settings, where they avoid stepping into leadership roles even when they are qualified, or they delay taking opportunities that would put them in front of others, choosing instead to stay in positions where their work is solid but their presence is less noticeable. It also appears in group situations, where they contribute just enough to stay involved but stop short of taking a central role, often letting others present the final idea even if they were the one who developed it in the first place. In creative areas, the same pattern can show up as hesitation to publish, share, or promote their work, even when the work is ready, and there is no clear external barrier preventing them from putting it out into the world. What makes this pattern more noticeable is that it continues even when the environment is supportive, when there is no direct criticism, no clear threat, and no obvious reason to hold back, which removes many of the usual explanations people rely on. In fact, even when they receive encouragement, positive feedback, or direct invitations to step forward, the internal response often stays the same, because the discomfort is not being driven by the situation itself, but by something more internal and automatic. This is why the pattern does not disappear when conditions improve, because it is not based on external risk, but on an internal expectation that visibility leads to something uncomfortable, even if that expectation is not clearly defined in the present moment. Over time, this repetition begins to shape decisions in subtle ways, because instead of choosing based only on ability or opportunity, they also begin to choose based on how visible a situation will make them, often without consciously labeling it that way. You can see this in how they structure their life, where they may prefer roles that allow them to stay behind the scenes, contribute without being highlighted, and maintain a level of control over how much attention is directed toward them. Even when they do step forward, it is often done in a controlled or limited way, where they can quickly step back again before attention builds too much, which creates a pattern of partial visibility rather than full presence. And when you connect all of these moments together, the pattern becomes clear, because it is not random hesitation. It is a consistent way of navigating situations that involve being seen, where the default response is to reduce exposure whenever possible. At that point, the question shifts again, because it is no longer about individual decisions, but about why this repeated response exists in the first place, and why it continues even when it no longer seems necessary. At this point, the most important thing to understand is the tension inside this pattern, because what makes it difficult is not just the behavior itself, but the contradiction that exists underneath it and keeps repeating without a clear resolution. On one side, there is a real desire to express, contribute, and be recognized for what you can do, because the ability is there, the ideas are there, and there is a natural pull toward using them in a meaningful way. On the other side, there is an equally strong pull in the opposite direction, where the moment that expression becomes visible, something in you tightens, hesitates, and begins to look for a way to reduce that exposure. This creates a situation where both impulses exist at the same time, and instead of canceling each other out, they create friction, because you move forward just enough to feel the possibility, and then pull back before fully stepping into it. The result is not complete avoidance, and it is not full expression either, but something in between, where you stay close to the edge of visibility without fully crossing into it. Internally, this can feel confusing, because your thoughts might say one thing, while your actions consistently show something else, and the gap between the two becomes harder to ignore over time. You might find yourself thinking, "I am ready for more," or "I want to be seen for what I can do." But when the moment arrives, your response does not fully align with that intention. Instead, another thought appears, often quieter but more influential, something like, "I would rather not draw attention," or "It is better if this stays low-key," even if that means missing an opportunity. What makes this tension stronger is that neither side feels completely wrong, because the desire to express feels valid, but the urge to avoid visibility also feels justified in a way that is hard to explain logically. So instead of resolving the contradiction, you end up managing it, adjusting your behavior in small ways that allow both sides to exist without directly confronting each other. This might look like preparing fully, but not volunteering, creating something valuable but not sharing it widely, or stepping forward briefly and then quickly stepping back once attention increases. Over time, this pattern can create a sense of frustration because you can see what is possible for you, but you also see how often you stop just short of reaching it, and that gap starts to feel familiar rather than accidental. At a deeper level, the question becomes more specific, because it is no longer just, "Why do I hold back?" But why does being seen feel like something I need to control or limit, even when part of me wants it? And that question points directly to something deeper than surface-level confidence, because it suggests that the reaction to visibility is not just a preference, but a learned response that still carries weight in the present. To understand this pattern from a different angle, we can look at how Edgar Cayce approached similar behaviors, not as random habits or simple personality traits, but as responses that may have been shaped by experiences that no longer belong to the present moment but still influence how a person reacts today. In many of his readings, Cayce described situations where a person had, in another lifetime, been visible in a way that led to negative consequences, such as being publicly criticized, punished for speaking out, losing status or safety because of attention, or becoming a target simply because they were seen and recognized by others. These were not small or neutral experiences, because they carried emotional weight, and in those moments, visibility was directly linked to discomfort, loss, or even danger, which created a strong association that could remain active beyond that single lifetime. If you take that idea and bring it into the present, the pattern starts to look different, because what appears today as hesitation or avoidance may actually be a continuation of an older response that once had a clear purpose. From that perspective, visibility is not just attention, it is interpreted as risk. even if the current situation does not contain any real threat, because the reaction is not based only on what is happening now, but on how similar situations were experienced before. This helps explain why the response feels automatic, because it is not something the person actively decides in the moment, but something that activates as soon as the conditions resemble that earlier pattern, especially when attention increases or recognition becomes likely. In practical terms, this means that when you are about to step into a visible role, present an idea, or receive recognition, part of your system may interpret that moment as something to be cautious about. Even if another part of you knows there is no actual danger, that internal split can feel subtle, because it does not always show up as fear in a dramatic way, but more often as a quiet pull to step back, delay, or reduce exposure, which makes it easy to justify as a personal preference rather than recognizing it as a deeper pattern. Cayce did not present this idea as something fixed or unchangeable, but as a way to understand why certain reactions feel stronger than the current situation would normally justify. Because the response is not being created from zero, it is being repeated from something that already existed. When you look at the pattern through this lens, the behavior begins to make more sense. Because avoiding visibility is no longer seen as a lack of confidence, but as a form of protection that once had a real reason behind it. That does not mean the same level of protection is still necessary today, but it does explain why the response can feel so consistent and difficult to override with logic alone. Because it is not just a thought, it is a conditioned reaction that has been reinforced over time. And this is where the perspective becomes useful, because instead of trying to force yourself to act differently without understanding the source, you begin by recognizing that the reaction itself may have been meaningful in a different context, even if it no longer fits your current reality. From there, the question changes again, because instead of asking why you keep avoiding visibility, you start to ask what kind of experience could have made visibility feel like something that needed to be managed, limited, or even avoided in the first place. At this point, it helps to expand the pattern and compare it with other experiences that might look similar on the surface, because this is where many people misidentify what they are actually dealing with and apply explanations that only partially fit. One of the most common comparisons is the fear of judgment, where a person worries about how others will evaluate them, whether they will be criticized, rejected, or seen in a negative way. And this can definitely lead to hesitation in visible situations. Another common comparison is imposter syndrome, where someone feels like they are not as capable as others believe, and they worry that being seen more clearly will expose that gap, which creates a tendency to avoid situations where their abilities are tested publicly. Both of these explanations can overlap with what we have been describing, but there is an important difference that becomes clear when you look more closely at how the reaction actually feels and when it shows up. In the case of fear of judgment, the discomfort is usually tied to specific thoughts about how others might respond, and it often changes depending on the situation, the audience, or the level of perceived risk involved. With imposter syndrome, the hesitation is connected to self-doubt about ability, and it tends to increase when the person feels unprepared or out of their depth, which makes the avoidance more situational and easier to trace back to specific concerns. But in the pattern we are exploring here, the reaction often appears even when those conditions are not present, because the person may know they are capable, may not be actively thinking about judgment, and may even be in a supportive environment. Yet the pull to avoid visibility still shows up. This is what makes it feel deeper and more automatic, because the response is not always linked to a clear thought process that can be identified and challenged in the moment, but instead appears as an immediate shift in behavior once visibility increases. You might notice that the hesitation happens before you fully think it through, or that you justify stepping back after the fact, even though the initial reaction came quickly and without much analysis. This can make the pattern harder to recognize because it blends into normal decision-making and can be explained away as preference, timing, or personality, rather than being seen as a consistent response to visibility itself. When you begin to see this difference, it becomes easier to recognize where this pattern is showing up in your own life, because you are no longer only looking for obvious fear or self-doubt, but for moments where visibility itself triggers a shift, even in the absence of clear external pressure. And once you see that, the pattern becomes more visible in everyday situations, not just in major decisions, but in small choices about whether to speak, share, step forward, or stay in the background. To make this pattern more grounded and easier to work with, it helps to look at how modern psychology would describe a similar response. Because even without referring to past life explanations, there are clear mechanisms that explain why visibility can trigger avoidance in a consistent and automatic way. In psychology, this kind of reaction is often understood as a protective pattern, where the brain has learned to associate a specific type of situation with discomfort or risk, and as a result, it begins to respond quickly to prevent that experience from happening again. This process does not require a conscious decision, because once the association is formed, the brain can activate a response almost immediately when it detects similar conditions, especially when those conditions involve attention, evaluation, or exposure to others. Over time, this creates a loop where visibility becomes linked with tension in the body, hesitation in behavior, and a subtle urge to step back, even if the person logically understands that the situation is safe and manageable. What makes this pattern more persistent is that it is reinforced each time the person avoids visibility, because stepping back reduces the immediate discomfort, which signals to the brain that avoidance was the correct response. This reinforcement does not happen in a dramatic way, but in small, repeated moments, where choosing not to be seen creates a short-term sense of relief, and that relief strengthens the pattern over time. As a result, the reaction can begin to feel automatic, because it is no longer being evaluated from scratch in each situation, but is instead being triggered as part of an established response system that has learned to prioritize safety over exposure. This also explains why the reaction often happens before conscious thought, because the body and nervous system respond first, creating a feeling of hesitation or resistance. And only afterward does the mind begin to justify that response with reasons that seem logical. In that sense, the pattern is not just about thoughts or beliefs, but about how the entire system has adapted to reduce perceived risk, even if that risk is no longer present in the current environment. When you connect this with the earlier Cayce perspective, the two views begin to align in a practical way, because both suggest that the response is not random, but shaped by previous experiences that taught the system to treat visibility as something to approach carefully. Whether you see that origin as past life memory or as learned conditioning in this life, the effect is similar, because the reaction continues to operate in the present, as if the same conditions still apply. And once you understand that, the focus shifts from trying to eliminate the reaction immediately to recognizing how it works, where it shows up, and how it has been reinforced over time through repeated choices to step back from visibility. At this stage, the most important shift is how you interpret the pattern, because the meaning you give to this behavior will determine how you respond to it going forward and whether you continue to see it as a limitation or begin to understand it in a different way. Up to this point, it is easy to label this pattern as avoidance, hesitation, or lack of confidence. And while those labels are not completely wrong, they are incomplete, because they focus only on what is visible on the surface without addressing why the pattern exists in the first place. A more accurate way to see it is as a form of protection, where your system is trying to reduce exposure to something it has learned to associate with discomfort, even if that association no longer reflects your current reality. This does not mean the behavior is serving you well today, but it does mean that at some point, the response made sense because it helped you avoid something that felt costly, whether that cost was emotional, social, or tied to a deeper experience you may not consciously remember. When you look at it this way, the pattern becomes less about weakness and more about adaptation, because your system is not randomly holding you back. It is following a rule that was formed under different conditions and has simply continued into the present. The problem is not that the pattern exists, but that it has not been updated, because the situations you are in now may no longer carry the same level of risk, even though your response still treats them as if they do. This is why logic alone often does not change the behavior, because the reaction is not based on a current evaluation, but on an older expectation that has been repeated enough times to feel automatic and reliable. Understanding this does not immediately remove the hesitation, but it changes how you relate to it, because instead of fighting the reaction or judging yourself for it, you begin to see it as something that can be examined, adjusted, and gradually reworked over time. And that shift is important, because once you stop seeing the pattern as a fixed limitation, you create space to question whether staying invisible is still necessary, or whether it is simply a habit that has outlived the conditions that created it. At the end of this, the question is not simply whether you should force yourself to be more visible, but whether you understand why staying unseen has felt like the safer option for so long. Because without that understanding, any attempt to change the behavior can feel like pushing against something you do not fully see. If at some point being visible was linked to loss, pressure, or unwanted attention, then choosing to stay in the background would not have been a weakness. It would have been a way to stay in control, reduce risk, and protect yourself from repeating that experience. But the important thing to consider now is whether that same level of protection is still necessary in your current life, or whether it is continuing out of habit even when the situation has changed and the original conditions no longer exist. So instead of asking yourself how to eliminate the fear completely, a more useful question might be to notice where you are holding back and ask whether the situation in front of you actually carries the same risk your reaction is preparing you for. Because if the risk is no longer there, then staying invisible may not be protecting you anymore. It may simply be limiting how much of yourself you allow others to see and experience. And that leads to a simple but important reflection, because it shifts the focus away from judgment and toward awareness. If being seen once came at a cost, would you still choose to stay invisible now, even if that cost is no longer part of your reality? If this made you recognize something in your own life, you can let me know by leaving a comment. And if there is a specific pattern or experience you want explored in future videos, feel free to share that as well. And if you want to keep exploring these kinds of patterns through the lens of Edgar Cayce's readings, you can like this video and subscribe to Edgar Cayce Narratives so you don't miss the next one.